Hey, Jason, this is Patrick Anderson. Just wanted to say congrats on 1,000 episodes and wanted to let you know how much I appreciate all the education you've given. Me personally, it's helped a lot. I just wanted to reach out and say thank you for everything you've done and appreciate all your help in real estate investing. Have a great day.
Welcome to the Creating Wealth Show with Jason Hartman. You're about to learn a new slant on investing, some exciting techniques, and fresh new approaches to the world's most historically proven asset class that will enable you to create more wealth and freedom than you ever thought possible. Jason is a genuine self-made multimillionaire who's actually been there and done it. He's a successful investor, lender, developer, and entrepreneur who's owned properties in 11 states, had hundreds of tenants, and been involved in thousands of real estate transactions. This program will help you follow in Jason's footsteps on the road to your financial independence day. You really can do it. And now, here's your host, Jason Hartman, with the complete solution for real estate investors.
Welcome to episode 1237, 1237, and thanks for joining us today. Hey, I know you always love client case studies, and we have another one for you today. It's a great one. It is a man of the cloth, a rabbi. Rabbi Evan Moffic is with us, and he's been buying properties through us for a pretty short time, and he's up to 5 properties already. He's just doing a great job, and I must tell you before we start, he is in the airport, but really wanted to thank you, Evan, for coming on the show. We may hear a little background noise, but we'll deal with it. How you doing?
I'm doing great, Jason. Anytime a chance to talk to you is just wonderful.
Well, thank you for coming on. The reason you're in the airport is because you just went to visit one of the properties you're buying through our network today in St. Augustine, Florida. Is that correct?
Yes, in Volano Beach area.
Fantastic. So you just came out from Chicago. You live in Chicago. You came out last night, or yesterday, I guess, and then you stayed one night and you're going back now. And how did you like your property today? Tell us about St. Augustine and Jacksonville.
Oh, it's charming. I mean, St. Augustine is such a beautiful city, so much history. We went on a bus tour. I actually did the bus tour before, looking at all the historical sites. And then this area of Volano Beach is really unique because the house I'm looking at, there's beaches on both ends of the street.
Right.
So you go down the street and you cross the A1A and you're at the ocean. You go down the other way on the street and you're at the Intercoastal, which has a beach a lot of the time. I guess at high tide, there's not much of a beach. But it was charming, and the water felt like it was 85 degrees.
Oh, yeah, it's like a bathtub. It's beautiful there. You know, as you heard on the podcast, I was just there a few weeks ago. Absolutely love St. Augustine. It's just a charming little place, and it is America's oldest city, too, or America's first city, I guess I should say. So you bought a short-term rental property there, and then you had reached out to me on Voxer the other day, and then we set up this call as we got to talking, because you've got half your portfolio basically in terms of dollar amount in the good conservative long-term rentals. I know you're buying in Memphis, or you have purchased there, right, I should say. And then this is the one short-term rental property in your portfolio. So that's nice and balanced, I think.
I hope so. You know, it makes me nervous a little bit. The long-term rentals just seem consistent. I could see in a recession, people still need to work. People still need a place to live, and their homes are cheap. And, you know, there's a certain comfort level with the sort of C+, B- kind of properties. They're more like B-. They're not. They're decent properties. So this made me nervous initially, but then that's actually why I came out and visited. But I saw the house, or saw it being built. It's fantastic. And it isn't that much. I mean, it's more expensive, but it's not like I'm paying $1 million.
Right.
That was one of the advantages, it seemed to me, of St. Augustine and Jacksonville, is you can still get properties by the coast for much less than you can get anywhere and have cash flow.
Yeah, no question about it. Now, how much did you pay for that one?
Price is $469.
$469 for that one. Are you going to visit it and use it at all for yourself and your own enjoyment, or strictly you're looking at it as an investment only?
I mean, we want to definitely use it. I'd say 90% of the focus is on renting it out. But we would definitely, I mean, we have vacationed in Jacksonville, St. Augustine before. We have family there. So I would think we would use it. I mean, for this type of property, that was sort of one of the criteria, that this would be someplace we would feel comfortable living, vacationing, enjoying. I mean, my wife and I are actually going to come out here again later in the summer, because I got to run everything at least by her once. I mean, she trusts me, but not that much.
Sure.
And so I could definitely see us vacationing here, and maybe, at one point in time, retiring here. I've been in so many other parts of Florida, which is more common for, as a man of the cloth. I have people in my congregation that are retired or at least spend the winter in other parts of Florida, mostly South Florida and Sarasota. Not many in Jacksonville, St. Augustine, but I could see ourselves here. It's just beautiful.
Yeah. Good stuff. How many people in your congregation, by the way?
We have about 500. Actually, now it's more than that. About 600 families.
Oh, yeah, that's big. Good for you. One of the things, and we'll kind of maybe go on tangents back and forth, but one of the things you mentioned that I thought was interesting and funny, and I got to just ask you about religion, because I don't think we have another rabbi as a client, so it's awesome to have you. You said to me before we started on this call today, you said...
Well, I can tell you one other thing about why. This is one thing I've learned from you. Rabbis we're paid nicely. It's a great living, but there's a wonderful retirement plan that we get, and there's some great bonuses. There's some tax issues called parsonage, but it's all equities. It's all equities and bonds. And, that's most people just retire with a large stock-heavy portfolio.
Right.
And that's fine. Of course, I have some, but as you've talked about, that's not a great investment. You can do so much better with single-family rentals. So that was one of the reasons I wanted to invest in that way. And I think many rabbis are just either don't want to think about it. It's just easier. The congregation signs you up for this plan. You go into it, It takes a little bit of to use that cliche, thinking outside the box to actually go and do this.
Yeah, compared to just giving your money to some financial advisor and, literally giving it to him or her, because you're probably going to be losing it, or at least some of it. It does take some work. I mean, the real estate game takes some effort. And that's why I just say, this whole passive income thing it's complete. It's bogus. It's absolute, it's a lie. It's a big lie. The funny thing I was going to mention to our listeners that I love that you said to me, religion is like a derivative. and as you know, you always hear me talking about derivatives as the thing about the thing. So elaborate on that, if you would. I thought it was interesting.
Well, let's say everything is God, okay? So have a sort of the spiritual idea that the entire world is God. There's a movement in Judaism called Hasidic Judaism, and that was their idea. Everything is God. And so the human experience, the relationships, physicality, our bodies, our whole experience of life is a derivative of God. God is everything. We're part of God. I really do see it that way. I think it's a perspective. And I don't even think you have to be religious to understand that. In some ways, all relationships are a derivative. You could say that they're a derivative of this idea of love or of connection.
Yeah.
Life is full of derivatives. I mean, I guess the only non-derivative is your direct experience. But even once it processes through the brain,
it's a derivative.
The way you think of it is a derivative. And so I really do think, and I think there was a great rabbi named Abraham Joshua Heschel, and he said the entire Bible is a derivative of the name of God, that God pronounces Adonai, I am God, and then everything else is just a derivative off of that one word.
Yeah, that's great. That's awesome. And, speaking of rabbis, on Voxer, when we were messaging back and forth 2 days ago, I think, or maybe yesterday, I told you that I read a couple of the books by Rabbi Harold Kirshner years ago, or Kushner, I guess. It's not Kirshner, sorry.
Yeah.
I love his book, Who Needs God? It was awesome. And what I love from that book is in the beginning, when he compares a sunset to the moon landings. And he's like 88 years old now, I think you said. And he says that, no two sunsets are alike. Every one of them is pretty remarkable, okay? And the moon landing, and he was just saying things that are godly, if you will, versus man-made. That's what he was talking about. And, I read this like 25 years ago, okay? So forgive me. But he just talked about, and he said, we get bored with the man-made things rather quickly. And he used the moon landing as the example. He said in 1969, when we first landed on the moon, the whole planet was watching. I mean, it was the most incredible thing ever. And then by the second moon landing, it was like, if I have time, I'll watch it. It's still interesting, but it's not that big a deal. And by the third one, NASA had to stage a lunar golf game to keep the public interested and to keep the money flowing to the space program.
Is that right?
Yeah. So,
yeah.
Isn't
that true about the human experience generally?
We adapt really quickly. Yeah.
Another favorite Kushner story, which I think actually is really helpful for real estate investing. He talks about how if a child builds a sandcastle and then a wave comes in and knocks over the sandcastle. The child laughs and then rebuilds it and goes on. But we will dwell on past tragedies, past mistakes. We get upset and we can't let it go. We can learn from children. Just let it go and move on to the next thing.
Right.
And I think with real estate, right, too, you always say there are going to be hiccups. There are going to be mistakes. You just have to keep going with it. You can't lose faith. You can't lose your focus just because one thing goes wrong.
Yeah, no question about it. You know, I interviewed the founder of DuckDuckGo, the search engine. I'm listening to the audio version of his book, Super Learning, which is excellent, by the way, or maybe it's called Super Thinking. It's really quite good. And one of the things he says in there is he says that a mistake, and I think I'm thinking of the right book and right author, a mistake repeated more than once isn't a mistake, it's a decision. And I thought that was interesting because, you know, if you do it once, it's a mistake. But if you keep repeating the mistake, it's actually a decision. It's called Super Thinking, by the way. And it's the subtitle's The Big Book of Mental Models. And so that's a really interesting.
Have to get that.
Yeah, it's really good. That's a really interesting model, if you will, for real estate, right? The kid just enjoys the experience, realizes, hey, they're learning from it, and so forth. Right. And we're all going to have huge challenges in our lives. Of course, you counsel people about that, I'm sure, every day.
Oh, yeah.
And we're going to have them with real estate investing, too. But another interesting thing about that, one of our clients, Sean, who's actually been on the show, he actually just sent me a message today. He was having a real struggle with some of his properties before, and I think he's going to come back on the show and talk about it. Sean, come back on. We'd love to hear it. He talked about how it's taken, I think, about 2 years, and he got them back on track. It took some real effort to do it and some real faith that it was going to work out. And he said, and then I checked, and they've all appreciated so nicely. And it's amazing how just a little bit of appreciation can make up for a few months of vacancy, lots of problems. And, you know, it's kind of the people that just stick with the program are the ones who just win the game, don't they?
Oh, yeah. One thing I often think about that you've said is I've invested in some syndications, too, and done fine. I mean, they're people I really trust, but I don't see the hiccups on those.
Right.
I'm sure they do.
They do.
And my returns probably are affected by them, but I don't see them. So whenever I have a hiccup here, like, $95 for a door lock change, I'm like, oh, come on. And I think, okay, I'm going to talk to the property manager about this. I'm not going to let anything get away that's not appropriate. But I realize that's par for the course, and that even in my syndications where I don't see that directly, that kind of stuff is happening.
The syndicator is feeling all that stuff all the time.
Right.
You're just not noticing it. It's there, and it's eating away at your return. You just don't you don't see it. It's just normal operations.
And I invested in those before I heard pools are for fools. Just to make that clear. Yeah.
There you go. So tell us a little bit about your portfolio. Now, you've been investing with us for just like less than a year, right?
Right. So I've got some properties outside the network, which, are fine. But one thing I have noticed, I did a lot of research. I'm probably typical for your clients. I know you have a strong clientele. Your clients are not people that are just will do whatever they're told. They're people that research. And, having done research, you have the best property managers. You don't go with the low end.
Well, we kick them out. Believe me, we've had property manager problems, but we just fire them.
I know. And I'm not going to say any, but I had talked with another, one of your competitors, I won't say their name, and had done a little bit of research, and they put me in touch with a property manager, and it turned out the person living in the property was a felon. And I was, they didn't even know it. They didn't even, all I had to do was Google the name. I mean, it was really, not, but it was very disappointing. And
so you mean
that
property manager placed a felon in one of your properties? Yes. The property manager might also be a felon. You never know.
No. It was a house that was for sale that had a tenant already in place.
Oh, got it.
So I had gotten to the point, and so I saw, and I just Googled the name of the tenant, and it was front page news.
Oh my gosh, that's really bad.
Shocking.
Yeah,
it was shocking.
Yeah. The property management industry is a real doozy, I tell you. It really is.
And you do the vetting that even if someone had time to do it, sometimes we don't know the right questions to ask. So it's a huge service. Yeah.
Well, thank you. And we will keep doing that. And a lot of the vetting, if you will, comes after we're working with them sometimes when we just realize they've become complacent, ungrateful, whatever. and they just get greedy. And strange thing about the human condition, we have this constant discontent. You might call it constructive discontent, and that's good. It makes for progress. But
yes,
some of it's just bad. At some point, you got to get your hand out of the cookie jar, and that's what happens with a lot of these managers. So,
I mean, I see that all the time in people that I counsel, members of my congregation, very successful, very affluent.
Mm-hmm.
And there are people who, even with all that, are just never content.
Yeah.
There is something to be said about enough.
Mm-hmm.
Once you're comfortable, just try to do something that's engaged. I mean, you love doing what you're doing. It's not, you had a very successful career before that. And that's the true key to happiness. Money's great, but money comes out of the pursuit of something that's engaging and meaningful.
Yeah, I agree. I look at my career as more like a mission. It's like a cause. I believe in it like it's this cause, like we're fighting a battle for the little guy, who's getting ripped off with other investments. And so, that's definitely the thing. But you sent me this very nice email, and you said, you called it 12 Random Nuggets of Jason Hartman, wisdom from Jason Hartman. So I love it. You want to talk about that?
More.
Yeah. Do you have it in front of you?
Yes, I have it right here. I think one of the things I love about your show and just the way you teach generally is it's conceptual.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just, here's the best way to get a loan. That stuff is important. All of that is important. What questions you need to ask your property manager, those kind of issues. That's all important. But to me, it's the conceptual stuff that really makes the difference in how you think about it. Because the other kinds of questions you can look up. But thinking about, how do I control taxes?
Mm-hmm.
That is a conceptual issue. What kind of investments do I make? So that really is, you think about a mortgage as an asset rather than a debt. That really, when I first heard it, I'm like, come on, that doesn't make any sense. And then it makes more and more sense.
Sure.
Embrace the fragmentation.
Mm-hmm. That
actually the way we can make better investments in this industry is because it's fragmented. That gives us the opportunity to have arbitration. So these kind of conceptual issues, to me, is what sets you apart and what sets not only that, but sets the successful investor apart. I've noticed that not just in real estate, but in other areas of life. It's the people who can really think about the broader issues.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That may sound like common sense, but there's that great, I think it's Oliver Wendell Holmes quote, who said, I'm not searching just for simplicity, but I'm searching for the simplicity on the other side of complexity. So it's getting these big ideas that are a little bit hard to understand, but once you understand them, they're kind of good guidelines for how to think about investing.
Yeah, well, thanks. I'm glad that's meaningful to you. And I'd agree. I mean, our education system is maybe a good comparison, right? Most of it is regurgitating from memory things that you learn versus how to think. I just think it's more important how to think. And, that's why I do the 10th episode shows, because everybody listening is much more than an investor. The investor, being an investor, is just a vehicle, right? Some people love it and really do have a passion for real estate. And some people are like, it's just a way to have financial freedom. So whatever it is for you is fine, but we're all whole people, right? So absolutely.
Ratios. I mean, thinking about life in terms of ratios, you've talked about how a 1% increase in interest rates leads to a 10% decrease in house purchases or
in prices. Well, to be even, if you have a 1% rate increase, which is really, of course, not 1%, because it's the percentage of the existing rate is what it really is, of course, but that's more complicated. But if you see it go up from 4 to 5%, for example, you've got to see the price of the house come down 10%. To equalize. And conversely, if you see the interest rate drop like it has now, the value of every house, if it's a 1% drop overall, the value of every house just increased by 10%. Think about it that way too, right?
In one of my books, a book about happiness, there is a ratio for successful relationships. There's this incredible doctor. If you could interview him sometime, he's amazing. And Dr. John Gottman. In Seattle.
Oh, I think I've interviewed John Gottman already. Yeah, I think I have.
He's incredible. Okay. I'm not surprising. You probably read it.
That name is definitely familiar. Yeah.
Well, he talks about the ratio of interactions. In a successful relationship, you have at least 5 positive interactions for every negative interaction. So if you're like, God, I can't believe you said that to this person. That's a negative interaction. You need 5 positive interactions to counterbalance that. And Gottman is so famous because he can essentially predict
whether
which
the
relationships
relationship's
will
going to
work
work. Yeah.
with like 90%. It's incredible.
Interesting. Yeah, very good.
Ratios. And, I thought about that with the decline in interest rates. I mean, in my most recent property, it's not going to be finished for another 8 months. And there's some advantages to that, right? Because the pricing is based on the market right now. I mean, of course, he's got to, I'm sure that he takes into account the timing. But if interest rates further go down, there's some appreciation even from the price that we get in May.
That's true. And if rates go up, there won't be appreciation from the interest rates, but there probably will be some appreciation just from time passing alone. Right. Yeah. Right. Yeah, that's good. Now, when you buy a property that has a long lead time, I mean, the perfect example of this, we have two big ones. It happened in Kansas City with a really good vendor that we had for years, a local market specialist who just went south, he got into some financial problems. We don't recommend him anymore. But there were huge delays, and everybody's like, when is my house going to be finished? Well, Lance, if you're listening, I'm thinking of your story right now. People saw giant price increases during that time. So it actually benefited them that we had the delay. The same thing happened to us in St. Louis years ago when we were recommending St. Louis. That local market specialist, we just basically gave him too much business, and he just could not keep up. And so there were big delays, and everybody was really anxious to close, thinking like, hey, I want to start my tax write-off and start getting the return on investment from the cash flow. I agree with you, but you actually made way more money because you locked in the price today and the price was going up at the same time. Now, if the market went down, that would have worked the opposite way. I just have to say that. It doesn't always work right, but it happened to work out right in these circumstances.
Right. You never know, right? It's a risk, but generally real estate rises more than it falls over time.
That's for sure.
You benefit from it.
Absolutely. Good. What are some of the other little nuggets that you want to share?
Well, of course, money or currency, not, use currency instead of money, just like you like to use income property, and that's your preferred term. But currency is a commodity like anything else. Mm-hmm. When it's cheap, get it. Mm-hmm. You were saying that 3-4 years ago, especially 2016. But, when you can borrow for such low rates, like we're going through right now, get as many mortgages as you can. I mean, people don't think of money that way, but it is. I don't even know. Somebody just said, maybe it was on your podcast, that essentially even when you're paying with a dollar bill, you're paying with debt, because that dollar bill is simply a debt claim on the Treasury.
Oh, yeah. It's all debt.
All of our money is debt.
Money is created or currency is created out of debt, for sure. They say that, people who talk and teach about the Federal Reserve, the way the fractional reserve banking works is money is lent into existence.
Right.
And that's, it's a very esoteric thing to really truly comprehend that. I mean, I don't know if I even truly get it. It's a real complicated thing. Yeah, go ahead.
The way I started to comprehend it was through my HELOC. Essentially, I mean, I know that there is a physical asset backing that, but suddenly there's this money I can spend that I didn't have before, and the bank essentially creates it. It was locked up in the house before, but then once it's with the government creating money, there isn't essentially an asset except the brand or the full faith and power of the United States government that allows the Treasury or the Federal Reserve to lend money into existence.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's a pretty great deal they have. And basically, we're just doing what the Federal Reserve and the government do on a much smaller scale, on a personal scale. So we're kind of doing that same arbitrage game that they're doing in a personal way. So, yeah.
Right. The other thing that I've kind of realized, this isn't such a lesson, but so much of this business is trust. Mm-hmm. In a way, that's part of the value that you give, is essentially helping create the situations where there's trust, that you've already shown you trust in these vendors. I mean, I come down here, I don't know these folks, and part of my coming down is to verify, but every time I've verified, it's been wonderful. And there is a kind of trust that you have to have in order for this to work. Like, I'm just thinking today, I met with one of the property managers that works with your local market specialist, and she was phenomenal. I was like, if this person's on my team, I'm the luckiest guy in the world. And that, to me, makes all the difference. And so that's just another lesson. That's not really a nugget, a Jason Hartman nugget. It's more like a derivative of my Jason Hartman experience. Is learning how important trust is in doing these successful investments.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good stuff. Number 10 in your nugget list here is notice the context, not just the content. I love that one. Yeah.
Well, that's true in everything.
It sure is.
I mean,
yeah.
Right. Again, there's a religious notion to this.
Mm-hmm.
A fish doesn't know what water is.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And in some ways, God, for a deeply spiritual person, God is like the air we breathe.
Mm-hmm.
It's everywhere. So sometimes we don't notice. For me, as a rabbi, part of the reason to pray and to study Bible, study Talmud, is to notice God, because God's everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's the context.
Right.
There's a great Einstein quote, which sort of fits this, where he says, you can either wake up every day thinking the world is a hostile place or the world is a kind place.
Right.
The choice is yours, and it makes all the difference. It's how we see that context.
No question about it. That context, I guess there are maybe two contexts, right? There's the sort of the real world actual context in which we live, our environment, the people we know. Yeah. And then there's the one that we literally create in our head by how we view everything. Like you said, you can wake up seeing the world as a really kind place or a really hostile place. And amazingly, some people truly live in really hostile environments, but they don't view the world that way. Or some people live in really scarce environments. Mother Teresa's an obvious example. When she was alive, she lived in this environment of terrible scarcity, but she was this really amazing person who kind of rose above all that and saw it in another way,
Right. You know what? It's interesting. Judaism, that's not the religious show, but Judaism generally sees the world in terms of abundance. In Christianity, there's always been kind of a glorification of poverty. Mm-hmm. The idea of monks, and there's kind of been this idea of the suffering servant. Judaism never had that. There was always a sense that the world is an abundant place. That's why there's nothing wrong in Judaism with gathering wealth. Mm-hmm. Now, with that wealth, you're supposed to give. There's a deep sense of philanthropy. Right. But the world is an abundant place, and God gave us these resources to make the most of it. And I think that's partially why, Jews have been generally successful in a lot in pursuits.
Well, also the education level of the Jewish community is very high, obviously, they're always dominating the professions. But interestingly, the dominating the professions concept now, that has kind of been disrupted, right? It used to be if you were a doctor or a lawyer, that was a very big deal, and you sort of wrote your own ticket in life, and that's not even true for them anymore, is it?
No. And what's happened too? This is sort of part of Jews. I've written about this from a historical point of view. Jews are now American, and we grow up kind of comfortable. Mm-hmm. And it used to be that the top students at all the schools were Jewish kids. Often their parents were immigrants or their grandparents were immigrants, and they were driven. Now there's not as much of a drive, and so you see the medical schools have more Asian students and Indian students. This might not be the most politically correct thing to say, but it's true. They're sort of in it.
It's just a fact. It's statistics.
It's a fact. Yeah. And you're right that those kind of professions, doctors do very well, but there's a sense that your education really isn't the ticket to success anymore. Mm-hmm. It's more entrepreneurship, creativity, relationship, and that makes more of a difference.
Yeah, good stuff. Well, what else do you want the listeners to know about investing, or any tips that you have, experiences you want to share in building your own portfolio? And thank you for your business. We really appreciate it, and for coming on the show, sharing your story too. But just anything you want to wrap it up with.
I say just do your research. There are some providers out there, this is true not just in real estate, but in general in sales, that just want you to get information from them. Do your research, and you'll come to see, I think, at least for me, that, Jason, you look out for your clients. With my investment advisor, there were things that I was looking at initially, and there was absolutely no pressure. There was, keep asking questions, do that, research it. And not only is it better sales because you have a confident client, but also you become more knowledgeable. So I'd say do the due diligence, constantly investigate, ask questions, and also just look at the big picture. I think about that all the time. There are going to be hiccups. I've already experienced some hiccups, and I haven't been investing that long. But overall, even with those hiccups, it's still profitable.
Yeah, that's the thing. Yeah, the investment has such strong characteristics that just the inertia of it even with these problems, it's like a big bus, rolling over a bumpy highway. Yeah, you're going to have bumps, but the bus is so big and powerful that it's just going to keep going,
Yeah. And I think
that's a metaphor.
This is another thing you always say, but you have to take action. I love to learn. I love to listen to the podcast over and over again. I love to learn. I love to read, but you really do learn more when you act. And there's a lot of Jewish teachings about that too. There's, it says a person who learns but doesn't do is like a tree that has lots of branches but doesn't have deep roots. So, you develop those roots through action. That gives you the real experience that leads to success.
Good stuff. Well, Evan, thank you so much for sharing your story. And we really appreciate having you on. And people just love these case studies. Listeners, if you're a client of ours and you want to be on the show, we'd love to hear from you too. We always get great feedback on these client case study interviews. We did go off on some tangents, admittedly, but I think it was great. So thanks for joining us, Evan.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for listening. Please be sure to subscribe so that you don't miss any episodes. Be sure to check out the show's specific website and our general website, hartmanmedia.com, for appropriate disclaimers and terms of service. Remember that guest opinions are their own, and if you require specific legal or tax advice or advice in any other specialized area, please consult an appropriate professional. And we also very much appreciate you reviewing the show. Please go to iTunes or Stitcher Radio or whatever platform you're using and write a review for the show. We would very much appreciate that. And be sure to make it official and subscribe so you do not miss any episodes. We look forward to seeing you on the next episode.